these past couple of games that I have been completing, majority of them are story focused games. That is by complete accident. I don't really mean to continuously play story-based games continuously. I do want to play some games that have like gameplay as a focus more so than its story, but unfortunately every game that I have reviewed or have played recently is heavily focused on its story. That includes Metro 2033.
You brave souls.
We live. I'm bringing back something that I played ages
The
ago.
Metro was our home.
This wasn't there in the previous
And
two
our
parts.
fortress against the nightmarish mutants who roamed the tunnels. Still, we never gave up hope that we would return to the surface. But one day, a new threat appeared, and we found ourselves in a war to determine the very existence of our species.
There we go. Okay. I think I sound alright.
Now, the one thing about this game that surprised me was the type of story it was trying to tell. It's very separate from all the other games that I have played, even with Mafia 1 and 2, excluding Mafia 3, of course. But Metro 33 is that what people would call Slav jank. At least that's what I've heard, okay? Before even trying out Metro 2033, Metro Last Light, and Metro Exodus, I did not know anything about these types of games. I went into this completely, absolutely blind. And I came out surprised. It is actually really good. The first two games are like a one connected bundle, and then the third game is an entirely separate entity that I'm going to be putting way more focus on, more so than the first two games, particularly Metro 2033. This first game, in what surprised me the most is how simplistic and boiled down to the basics this type of gameplay is. It is a first-person shooter, but it's also a realistic first-person shooter, but it's also a realistic first-person shooter that has mechanics in its realism. And example is the gun itself. It doesn't overheat, that's not one thing. The guns are designed based in the world that it's in, right? So the world that they're in is an apocalypse. It's post-apocalypse. The bombs had already fallen. It's a complete nuclear wasteland on the surface, and everybody's hiding out in the metro. And it's been like that for a couple of years. And so the way the weapons are designed and the way they work is by combining parts, random parts, putting them together, and essentially creating firearms that are a mismatch of parts, not something that you would make pristinely. This creation of firearms is, and the way they work and the way they reload, is exactly how you would have expected. Yes, by the end of the game you do get like traditional firearms, but in the very beginning you're kind of stuck with the basics and the very obtuse and weird firearms. So like the shotgun doesn't look like a regular shotgun, but you do have AKs and you do have revolvers. All of these types of guns, they're great, but I do love that their design fits the world. However, in terms of its gameplay, there's only a few weapons out there in this game that really do belong in this world more so than the others. Those weapons I don't use very often, but the pneumatic weapons. Now these pneumatic weapons, as interesting as they are, is ones that you have to pump every time you want to shoot something. You pump them up all the time, and then you essentially get enough pressure to shoot. And then as you shoot, you're releasing pressure. You shoot these rods, you shoot these arrows, and then the entire gun runs out of pressure. Then you gotta repump. You repump it with pressure, and then start shooting again, which is again something to add to the tension of when you're fighting against human enemies, when you're fighting against monsters. You would have to have that pressure of having to pump up your gun constantly. But it's not something you think, it pulls me out of it. But no, it absorbs me even further, because this is not the type of gun that you would see in real world. I mean, you would have pneumatic weapons before, but they're kind of useless. The fact that you constantly have to pressurize the gun, then and only then can you shoot, is interesting. It makes the weapon fit this world. But that's as far as really the gameplay goes in terms of complexity. Most of it is a first-person shooter. If you played first-person shooters, played Metro before. But it's a different kind of first-person shooter. It is also a survival first-person shooter. So survival horror more so than anything else. And the survival horror aspect is something you get to choose. Now, when you start this game, the one thing I did love is how each difficulty actually means something. There is a need to try out the different difficulties. It's kind of like Devil May Cry in the sense that every difficulty has changes to the game, has changes to how you play the game, and it gives you an entirely different experience. Hence why these difficulties are a great addition. The fact that when the normal difficulty the game has is, well, what everyone will experience. You get to see the prompts, you get to use a lot of the mechanics that the game forces you to kind of use. There's incentive because if you don't use certain mechanics of the game, the very little mechanics the game gives you, you will die. You will suffer, even on the normal difficulty. There isn't anything below that. It is normal, hardcore, ranger hardcore. And even before this, you get to choose the style of play. Now, I'm playing the Redux version of Metro 2033. There is the original. This is technically the remaster or remake, which comes with a bundle of Last Light. And so with that bundle, it gets a lot of the things that Last Light works on. Because in Last Light, you get a more action-oriented experience, which means you don't have to worry too much about ammo. You'll eventually get ammo, you'll always pick it up. And so whenever you run out, you move into the next area, there'll be a bunch of ammo you can pick up, right? That's the kind of game that Last Light was. Very action-focused, very human enemy-focused, right? I'll get into Last Light when I play it. But 2033 was originally a survival game. And so having to conserve ammo, having to conserve gas masks, having to conserve the oxygen for each of your gas masks, having to conserve health regeneration, all of these things were to come into play on the survival playstyle. For both my playthroughs of Metro 2033, I played on the Spartan, so I don't know whether or not the survival aspects are well done in that category because I didn't really play it. I spend most of my time in the Spartan, so that's why I'm talking specifically about Spartan. Hence why the survival aspect of the game didn't really come into play all that much, considering that the ammo was in abundance, the oxygen was in abundance, health was in abundance, every supply that would be in the survival category were in abundance. And so there was never a point in the game where I had to worry about ammo, or I was out of ammo for a long period of time and I had to focus on just having these 2 bullets. I can't waste them, gotta get them headshots, even though I still focused on trying to get headshots since that's like a one-shot kill, you know, because of realism. Regardless, that's the first thing you get to choose. It's your playstyle, survival or Spartan. Then you get to choose your difficulty, and each of the difficulties change your experience. Normal, not easy. There is no easy difficulty in this game, so you get what you get. And so normal, quite difficult even on its own. You get your entire HUD, right? You get HUD prompts. You can essentially see everything that you're supposed to be seeing. You get a lot of hints and tutorials. The game really tells you where to go in certain cases, right? It's the easy difficulty, but it's still quite difficult because it kind of forces you to really play without the HUD sometimes, because the HUD is the pop-up HUD rather than it being a constant on. So the HUD would be only appear when you are in combat, or would only appear when you shoot your bullet. If you're not in combat, if you're not fighting anything, you'll just have no HUD half the time. Hence why it is an on and off type of HUD. Now, the hardcore difficulty just ramps up in terms of enemy aggressiveness, as well as your health being like this. You ended up just dying in 1 or 2 hits from different enemies, right? The Norsalises just completely decimate you with a couple of hits. So hardcore is pretty difficult. It's kind of the normal and hard difficulty. But then we get into the interesting one, the Ranger and Ranger Hardcore. Now, Ranger is a difficulty selection that essentially turns off your entire HUD and tutorial is gone. It's kind of like Grounded on The Last of Us, right? Except in that one, you kind of needed the tutorial to teach you exactly what the controls are at the very least, and not spoil any of the fun, but to teach you at least how to play, so you don't get frustrated. Because if you play straight out of the gate on Grounded, kind of difficult because there is no prompt. You can't even see your inventory, so it's a bit difficult in that sense. Hence why it's one of the harder difficulties on The Last of Us. But here, they don't have tutorialization. However, your entire HUD is no longer there, meaning you can't see how much ammo you have. You gotta kind of have guess or count the amount of bullets that you do have, or see it in the gun. You don't know how much supplies you have. You need to know the buttons to check actually your supplies. But throughout the entire game, the point is you don't have a HUD, and you kind of are on hardcore for a little bit. You're not on normal. You still die with 1 hit for certain enemies, but you die quicker against Norsalises since they are so aggressive. Then there's Ranger Hardcore, which is basically the hardest difficulty, and to play it on that difficulty, it's a completely different experience. To play survival and Ranger Hardcore, it's a different experience to what I went through. It's much more difficult, and since you have to worry about ammo, you have to keep count of all your ammo, you have to keep count of all your supplies. It is not in abundance, it's in a scarcity, so you kind of have to pay a lot of attention when it comes to Ranger Hardcore. It's a completely different experience, hence why with all the different difficulties you will definitely get different experiences. However, the most immersive experience is definitely Ranger, considering that you do still get some of the gamey aspects, but since the HUD is mostly off throughout the entire game, you are more invested and more immersed in the world and the story that you've been presented, which is a very good time to talk about the world and the story. Metro 2033 is one of the most interesting worlds I've ever explored. Interesting, not best, very much interesting. The reason behind that is because the entire concept is interesting. The concept being bombs had fallen on Moscow, completely decimating the surface. You can't even breathe on the surface, but the underground is where you gotta live. Now, if you were able to escape into the metro systems, those very bunker-esque metro systems, you would have survived, but now you gotta live with a lot of people. You're all in like cramped space. It's kind of like Snowpiercer, the movie, where you kind of have to live in like a cramped train, but here you're living in the metro station. You can't live in the tunnels because the tunnels are very dangerous and there's lots of holes where certain things could come through, hence why you gotta live in the station. And the stations, large as they are, when you gotta accommodate so many people, those stations become smaller and smaller, right? They become quite a small endeavor, which makes the entire experience walking through these metro, it feels alive because you see so many people, but also it feels desolate because regardless of how they are acting, you can see they're mostly depressed, since you will constantly see the same people all over again. It's like the extreme version of living in a small town, but even smaller than that. And that's the vibe you get when you walk around the metros, when you go to different locations in the metros, when you see the different metros that are shown to you. There's completely destroyed ones where everyone has just died recently from monsters, right? Then there's the most pristine, polished looking metros like Polis, which is where your goal was, and you see how that is, but that entire thing seems just like a facade that's put up to look pretty, but everyone's still depressed because they have to live down here in the metro. They can't see the sun. Some children have never seen the sky. Can you believe it? Some children has never even seen the sky, which is interesting considering there is a short section of the game where you carry around a child, right? Because his uncle just died, so you have to carry him to his mother. He sees the sky. He said he's gonna be famous. I was like, damn, that does make sense, right? Children who were born in the metro, because people are still going to procreate, or will never be able to see the sky, which is a very interesting concept. They will have grown up in a metro station. They won't know what was there before the metro station, right? It's that kind of realization when you see that Ellie in The Last of Us seeing an ice cream truck for the first time, and then Joel has to actually explain what an ice cream truck is. It's that realization, like, oh, there'll be people that have grown up in this world that don't know about the world before, and that's a very interesting start. However, the main plot of Metro 2033 is these creatures, the Dark Ones. Now, the Dark Ones is a whole story on its own. There's a lot of things that I have criticisms in terms of the main story. The story, supposedly, which they don't really tell you, or it's so subtly, it's a choice-based experience. You don't realize it, but it is a choice-based experience. Well, I say choice-based, but it's not technically a choice-based experience. What I mean by this is that the final moment in the game, right, which is you blowing up the Dark One, your enemies throughout the game, but not exactly your enemy. When throughout the entire game, the most enemies that you do fight are humans and mutants, right? You never really fight Dark Ones, but they are considered your all big two enemy, right? They are the boogeyman of the metro stations, right? But you never really get to fight them, only until the very end of the game when their lives are in danger since you're about to blow them up with some nukes. And so now you're asking that question to yourself. They never attacked me, so what could have been, you know? What did I actually do at the very end of the game? Turns out, I knew this from before playing the game, that there are two endings. There's the good and the bad ending. Technically, the bad ending is canon, since Last Light actually tells you what you did at the very end of the game is bad.
Come on, Khan.
The bombing of the Dark Ones may have been humanity's worst mistake. What if they meant us no harm, but were trying to communicate? Perhaps the severe pain and loss of consciousness suffered in their presence just meant we were incompatible. Machines with different...
Until you get to Last Light, you don't really know this. But in the first game, there is a good ending. The way to get it, though, it is so asinine. It's the same thing in Last Light, okay? To get the good ending in Metro 2033, this is what you have to do, right? The whole idea of the good ending is that the Dark Ones are an evolved creature, right? They are an evolved human. They are trying to communicate with those in the Metro. They want to help them. They want to get them out of the Metro, you know, help them live in the surface since they can live in the surface. They're an evolved human, essentially. But then when they try to communicate with the devolved version of themselves, they cannot, because them just trying to communicate makes them go insane and actually kills them. So it's not particularly hostile. They're not trying to be hostile. It's the unintentional hostility, which is that which they cannot understand. They won't be able to understand them regardless of whether or not they try to communicate. The humans cannot understand them and the dark ones cannot communicate properly to them, right? Only one person was able to hear them communicate, and that was Artyom, our main character. But you don't know this, since the dark ones appear to be mostly hostile. Well, every time they show up, they're kind of helping you, but you don't realize this until the end of the game. You only realize this by the end of the game, and you already have your choice completely made for you. There is no like, oh, what do I gotta do? Do I gotta make now a choice at the very end? No. Your choice is set. The choice you have to make is throughout the game. Now, to get this good ending, right? I looked it up, and this is how you have to do the good ending. 1, you have to not kill anybody throughout the entire game, right? You have to basically do a passive run. A majority of your game should be passive. Every human enemy that you come across, cannot kill them. The reason why is because the dark ones are consistently watching. That means you can't kill any of the Reds, which are the communists. You can't kill any of the Nazis. You can't kill any of the people that you come across. Or you can kill the mutants, but that's fine. But you cannot kill any of the human enemies. Why? Because the dark ones are consistently watching you. And if they see you kill others, they will think, okay, you're just going to kill us, right? And so you have to not kill anybody. You have to do basically a passive run, which is very difficult on your first playthrough. You're never getting the good ending on your first playthrough, even though the good ending is the canon run for Last Light. We'll get to that one when we get to it. Regardless, that's what you have to do, a passive run. Then you have to make sure you interact with every single NPC. When a moral choice is presented to you, do you give a bullet to someone in need, or do you want to help out a kid by giving him some bullets so that he can lead you? Essentially, that's what you have to do. You have to do good deeds. But then you also have to find every single note in the game, if I'm not mistaken, and only then. This you have to do in one single playthrough. So that means you have to do a pacifist run. There's no easy difficulty that you can put this on to make sure that you get that passive run, because passive runs in this game is very difficult. Trust me, I've tried. They are very difficult. You have to literally walk with the guy to get through that passive run. It's very difficult. It's not impossible, it's just very difficult. And so the good ending essentially is you not blowing them up and them having a conversation properly with you. They're able to tell you that they're not actually hostile, and then you tell Ullman to stop, and that's the good ending. But it's completely non-canon, since in Last Light, as you know, the beginning, you've already killed them, right? The story would not have happened in Last Light if you don't actually kill them, right? And then Last Light has the same issue. But this is what I mean by the story. It is a hidden choice-based system, one where you actively have to play it on a much harder difficulty to be able to even get a relatively good ending. Hence why it's not canon, I guess. That does work there. Regardless, the plot does end, I would say, in a bittersweet moment where you do lose people on the way. People have sacrificed themselves for you to get to that point, but you do acquire something that you couldn't have before, and that is D6. That whole section, just arriving in D6, which is great because D6 is something that will be referenced all the way throughout until Metro Exodus, right? And so D6, arriving there for the first time, it is a contrast, because everywhere in the Metro, no matter what station you're at, it's claustrophobic as hell. People are like living and sleeping right above your head, right? If I was there, I would be reaching the ceiling since I'm quite tall. But yes, it is that claustrophobic. When you arrive at D6 for the first time, one, there's automatic trams, there is an entirely massive station that looks like a proper bomb shelter, and I was like, damn, looks like a proper silo. And so it is a direct contrast to what you would have expected from the Metro. It even shows that, but it is still not free from hostility, because there are things in the Metro that in D6 that you have to take care of, which not my favorite section in terms of having to take care of creatures, but the location itself is really cool. Regardless, the gameplay as it is very realistic. It's a 8 out of 10 in terms of its realism. The other aspect is the story. I don't like that the good ending takes so much time to get, but it's like at the same time you might be thinking, okay, wait, the good ending is something that you have to struggle to achieve, right? And it's more so, my gripes with the good ending type of thing in Metro is more so with Metro Last Light than it is with Metro 2033, since the bad ending is canon. So regardless, I won't say that the story is entirely bad, but it is a struggle to get that good ending. I did try, right? But every single character that you come across is either really good, well written, has some characterization to it. Miller, first time we ever see him, but we're gonna have a really long relationship with him, and it's great. I do love the first game, 2033. It's a great start. It's not something that was written or created created for a start of a series, but it is a really good start to said series. Next, we're going to be talking about Metro Last Light, and that one, I do have more gripes with it than I do praises, so I guess we'll see.
To this
A
game.
wise man once said, "He who leads a war for the love of his fellow men will defeat his enemies." I led my war protecting my family and friends, protecting my home, the Metro. We had won. But to this day, I wonder, when we burned the Dark Ones from the face of the earth, was something lost as well?